everybody, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Joey Evans.
And today we're taking a look at Twilight Struggle, Red Sea conflict in the Horn of Africa.
Baby Twilight Struggle.
So, yeah, now we actually just said that about a game we played a few weeks ago, Flashpoint.
Right.
This is, and that is Baby Twilight Struggle to some degree.
It is.
This is actually not Baby Twilight Struggle. This is like if you took Twilight Struggle, laid it out on the table, and cut a big piece of it out.
Right.
And said, we're just going to play this piece.
That's exactly what it is, because it's like they just took all the rules, everything in the first one, and then said, hey, let's just have you play part of that. And it sounds, yeah, it's shorter. It's so at 2 rounds compared to 10.
It is, so keep that in mind. I mean, let me show you how to play. If you've never played Twilight Struggle before, don't worry. This will give you at least some of the idea of how it plays.
Yeah.
In this game, players are trying to win the game, and there's a auto victory if you control Ethiopia and Somalia and more African countries. When Africa is scored, that's an auto win to the game. But other than that, at the end of the game, you're going to see who's higher in victory points. You notice victory points goes from 0 to 10 here, but if the U.S. has maybe 5 victory points, and then the USSR, for example, would get 6 victory points, we would simply subtract 5 from US, flip this over to the USSR side, and move it up 1. So basically, if you see this at the end of the game, and it's your side showing, then you've won. Now, what we are doing here, this is a small portion of the world. We see both Africa and the Middle East here, and you'll see many different regions here on the board. And I have a little bit of the starting setup here shown. But as the game goes by, you're going to be adding influence to various countries on the board. Now, there's a little number in the top of each of these regions. This is a stability number. If the amount of influence you have in a region is equal to that number, and you have at least that much more than someone else, you control that region. So the U.S. controls Ethiopia. It does not control Saudi Arabia, even though I have 1 influence there. You'll notice the stability number is 3. If the U.S. increases their influence to 3, they would now control it. However, if the USSR manages to get 1 in there, so now it's 3 to 1, that difference is not 3. So the USA would no longer control that region. But if they manage to get it, say, up to 4, now it's at least 3 and at least 3 higher than the USSR. So that's kind of the way the game is going to be working. You're trying to control different regions. Some regions are considered battleground regions. Their names are in purple. And then there's also some special regions here, Ethiopia and Somalia, and that's mostly for this auto victory type thing. There's a space race going on down here. There's DEFCON status up here. If at any point you make DEFCON go to 1, then you automatically lose the game. So you don't want that to happen. The game is actually only 2 turns. And then there's a final scoring turn, and then you could optionally play with some drafting and some special rules, a 3-turn game. But it's going to be 2 turns in this game. And each turn is going to have 7 actions and a headline phase. Now, all of this is done with some cards. There are 2 decks of cards in the game, mid-war, which you'll shuffle and use for the first turn of the game. Each player will get 9 of these cards, and then you'll be playing these back and forth. During the second round of the game, you'll take whatever cards weren't used from the first round, shuffle the late war cards in those, and then that deck will be used for the second round. These cards have all sorts of things in them, but what you'll notice is there's a scoring card, an Africa scoring card, and a Middle East scoring card. When these cards are played, and if you draw one, you have to play it at some point in your turn, there will be a scoring for that region. But regardless, at the end of turn 2, both of those cards essentially happen even if they haven't been played. Whenever you have a card in your hand, you'll notice that there's an event on the card, and then there's an operation point value in the top corner, which goes from 1 to 4. You'll notice that star is either red, white, or it could be both colors. So when I play a card, I can play the event if that color matches mine. So if I'm the USSR, I can play this to do Cyrus Vance and do whatever it says down here. You also notice there is a star here which says I remove this from play if I use it as an event. So I can do that. If I'm the USSR player, I cannot use this event, Hero of the Crossing, but I can use the operational points. You can always use the operational points. But if you use the operational points and you use a card of your opponents, then they will get to do the event. Now you can decide, you can let them do the event first, then you use your operational points, or you can do the points first and let them do the event. But if you draw my events in your hand, I'm going to get to play them. The only exception is here, either side can play this event when the star is white and red. And if I play this as operational points, my opponent does not get the event. And there's all sorts of different events in the game. On the side of the board, it shows you different ways that you can spend operational points. And by the way, I really like that this is here on the side of the board. It's a very nice way to show you. Let's say I have 3 operational points. A very simple way to operational points is you can add influence to countries. You can always add influence to a country that's adjacent to one that you're in or to one that you're in, and it costs 1 operational point to put an influence there, with the exception if your opponent controls a region, it costs you 2 operational points to put influence in there. However, if you eventually cause them to no longer control it, let's say I managed to get this to 2, the USSR no longer controls it, now it only costs 1 operational point. So that's an easy thing to do, is to add operational points. You can also add operational points up here to the strategic sea lanes, which has this, you don't need to have a line connected to it to get into it. And there's some extra rules about that. Another thing you can do is you can basically do what's called realignment rolls. When you do a realignment roll, you and your opponent are both going to be rolling dice, and you're just trying to make their influence go down. So you roll a die, and the difference between the dice is how far it goes down, but there's a lot of factors. Whoever has more influence in the country gets +1, and each additional country you control connected to it gives you a +1. So obviously, the more influence you have, the better chance you have of making your opponents go down. And so each realignment roll that you try costs 1 point. You can also do a coup. A coup's where you make their operation points go down and you make yours go up. It's a very big deal. You're going to roll a die and you need to basically get a number that's equal to double the stability number here. So in a country that's like Saudi Arabia, it's much harder to do a coup than it would be in, for example, Ethiopia. Coups, though, are dangerous because they always decrease the DEFCON status, and of course that could cause nuclear war and make you lose. And when the DEFCON status is on 3 and 2, certain spots can't have coups done in them any longer. The good thing about coups is they give you required military operations, because at the end of every round, wherever DEFCON status is, you need to do that many military operations or you will give the other side points. The other thing you can use operation points for is you can roll a die and try to go up on a space race, and the first person to move up on this track here to the different spots gets bonuses. The other awesome thing about moving up on a space race track is when you move your token up, when you use ops for that. Let's say I'm the Russian player and I use, for example, this card here. I do not give my opponent the event if I do this. So that's kind of how the game is going to work back and forth. Now, the actual structure of the game is, like I said, in the first turn, you're going to shuffle this mid-war deck, and each person's going to have 9 cards. The first thing in a round is called the headline phase. Each person simultaneously is going to pick a card from their hand, and you're going to do the event on it, period. Whether it's for you or not, although usually you'll pick your own event and do that event. And events will go off based on the number on there and so on. After those event happens, the USSR takes their first action, then the US, and we go back and forth, and you're simply taking a card from your hand and playing that card. Now, there is a card here called the Romanian Autonomy, which begins with the US player. They can always use this card, but if they do use it, then it's going to pass to the other person, and it's worth a victory point at the end of the game. Speaking of victory points, control, it's all about those. I mentioned that there are scoring cards as the game goes by, and you will use these scoring cards at the end of the game, but basically, scoring cards are going to give points to presence, which means you control some countries in a region, domination, which means you control more countries and you control more of these battlegrounds. And control means you control basically everything. You control all the battlegrounds and more than the other person, and you get an extra point for each controlled battleground region. And also the strategic sea lanes will affect your scoring. So controlling this is a big deal. Now, there's a whole lot more to the game than that. I gave you a basic overview because there's so many different cards here. Then you will have to learn these as you go through the game. And I don't even know what all these cards are, but see, the Z-Big lets you make a coup attempt using this card's value. It's not restricted by it, has no effect on the DEFCON track. So that's kind of an interesting thing, but it's only for the U.S. While here, the Anti-Zionist Committee make 2 realignment rolls in the Middle East with an additional +1 modifier. There's all sorts of cards, and as a side note, some of these cards you can play and stick into an actual game of the Big Brother game, Twilight Struggle itself. Anyway, hopefully that gives you a little idea of how this game works. Now, I can't really speak to playing this not knowing Twilight Struggle rules.
Right.
Although, I almost would say, hey, maybe you should play this first, then you could play Twilight Struggle. Because this, on the side of the, I really like how on the side of the board they tell you this is how coup works, this is how this works.
Yeah.
I mean, they have that sort of stuff in Twilight Struggle on sheets, and this one also has a ton of reference sheets. This game looks more complex than it is.
Well, that's the way GMT does it.
Solo rules, rule book, card play summary. Here's all the events. The U.S. space, the space selection table.
Sometimes I feel like
More
GMT
summary.
wants you to be overwhelmed opening the box with font size and everything.
Doesn't this feel like a really complex game with all the stuff I just pulled out?
It really does, and it's really not. But now, how do you feel about Twilight Struggle, the original? Did you like
love it.
Okay, so do
I rank it very highly.
But did you switch to the app on that one too?
The app's really good.
The app's so good on that one.
But if I'm playing someone who knows what they're doing,
Right.
it is not a particularly hard game to get out to the table.
Nope.
I love the theming of the Cold War.
Yes.
I got to be honest. I don't know a lot about this particular section.
No, I don't either.
Like, in the cold, when I play Twilight Struggle, I'm like, ooh, I remember that. Ooh, I was alive for that. Ooh, that's interesting. Here, I was like, I don't know what that means.
No.
Now, they have the notes in here. You can read about that. I find that to be interesting, but this is definitely a subsection. And I find it fascinating, we have not tried it, that you can take some of these cards and stick them in Twilight Struggle.
That's impressive. And vice versa, too, right?
No, I don't
There's
think
some cards you can bring over?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Okay.
So, if you like Twilight Struggle, I think you'll like this. But, okay, so here's the but. Twilight Struggle is 7 rounds.
Right.
This is 2. In Twilight Struggle, the early war cards, you're going to see them.
Yep.
So, for example, if I don't draw the card, my opponent will.
Right.
Probably. And it's possible in Twilight Struggle that you never get your cards. But again, your opponent can play. Now, again, they could like say, I'm going to play this for Space Race every turn. You'll never see this card.
Yeah.
In this game, though, you definitely won't see some of the cards. They're just not going to come out. And it feels a little bit more random.
It does.
Since there's only well, I guess if you include the headline phases, only 16 turns.
Right, and I don't know how I feel about the sneaky victory thing, that North Africa thing where if you get the certain combination, it's just an auto win.
Well, it's not that sneaky. You can see it.
You can see it, but then you have to kind of watch that while you're watching the other area, and it adds a different element. But does this have the tension of Twilight Struggle to you?
Slightly, but not as much, because Twilight Struggle, I always feel like the kid poking his fingers in holes in the dam.
Right.
Because I'm like, aha, Middle East. Wait, you're in Southeast Asia. Oh, no. Oh, we're now talking about Cuba. And here there's 2 regions. I'm like, I should cover, I guess, these 2 regions.
Yeah, and now see, one thing that this does is, I understand having to have a quicker game. Twilight Struggle is long. It's hard to hit the table. But it also, to get a longer game, gives you that epic feel. This one, you can blink, make the wrong decision, you just cause nuclear war and it's over.
And I do like that, actually. But
it's like, oh, sorry, you know? So that right there kind of, I prefer Twilight Struggle over this because of the epic feel it gives you.
I agree. I also prefer Flashpoint over this.
I do,
you mentioned
too.
at the beginning, because if I want to play Twilight Struggle, I want to play Twilight Struggle. If I
Right.
want to play a short and streamlined Twilight Struggle, that's what Flashpoint is. Like I said, this one, and again, I want to be clear, I like this.
Yeah.
This is fun, but this feels like I'm playing a piece. Mm-hmm. Historically, that's cool.
Yeah.
Time-wise, it's cool. And what does it say out there? 35 minutes? I love that, very specific. 35 minutes? That's probably specifically correct.
It is. It is. It's almost like eating one chip and putting the chips away and putting them back in there. I'm with you. We didn't talk about this before. I think if you're going short, Flashpoint's the way to go. And if you want Twilight Struggle, play Twilight Struggle, I think.
Or a game of its ilk, like 1989 or...
Yeah. Flashpoint.
But I still think this is interesting.
Oh, I do. I do,
I
too.
still like this a lot. I think the sea lane is interesting.
Yep.
That's a fun aspect of the game. The events are interesting. But because the events are all going to be in the same area, I'm like, oh, no, are you about to devastate Europe? Again, it's Africa
Right.
and the Middle East.
Right.
Those are the 2 things you're fighting over. And the scoring cards are a little weird because in the original game, the scoring cards are happening.
Yeah.
Here they may or may not happen, although they're going to happen at the end of the game. So, and the space track is, It's a shortened thing. My final rating on this is a 7. I like it. I'll play it. I'm glad to play it. It just makes me, it almost makes me yearn for the bigger one more.
I agree.
Like after playing this, I was like, I'm really in the mood to play Twilight Struggle again. But actually, I want to take these cards and stick them in Twilight Struggle.
I agree.
You know, and I'm like, ooh, I want to try this in the bigger scope of things. But I don't think this is a bad product. I think if you like Twilight Struggle and you want to see a microcosm, I'm concerned it's not as tight because of the randomness of the cards.
No, I agree with that. I think I come in at a 7 as well, only because I do think if you love Twilight Struggle and you want to introduce your friends to it, this is going to be a lot easier to have them play than that. But again, it gives you kind of a portion of the tension, but not the full tension of that whole Cold War, which it shouldn't at 35 minutes. Not 30, not 40, but 35 minutes. So yeah, I come in at a 7. I do like it, but I would play the original over it.
Well, there you go. That's Red Sea Conflict in the Horn of Africa. I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Joey Evans.
And we're here keeping the peace.
Peace or blowing things up. Doesn't matter.
Kind of matters.